Hi there, welcome to Fantasy Hub. I'm Mia, your storyteller. Today's story is filled with heartache, discovery, and a twist you won't see coming. So let's begin.
The wine glass trembled in my hand as I watched her approach. Courtney Perry 20 6, fierce and absolutely livid. Her paint stained combat boots clicked against the gallery's polished concrete floor, like a countdown to my professional execution. You, she said, her voice cutting through the opening night chatter, are Emily Clark. I straightened my shoulders, adjusting my designer blazer armor against the storm I could see brewing in her dark eyes. At 42, I'd weathered countless confrontations with artists who disagreed with my reviews. But something about this woman felt different, dangerous. I am. I took a sip of my wine, savoring the moment before the inevitable explosion. And you must be the artist whose exhibition I critiqued. Her laugh was sharp, bitter. Critiqued. You eviscerated my work. Called it juvenile attempts at profundity, and technically competent but emotionally hollow. The words hung between. It's like a gauntlet thrown down. Around us, gallery patrons pretended not to listen while straining to catch every syllable of what promised to be a delicious public confrontation. I stand by my assessment, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I felt the first crack in my certainty. Up close, with her passion radiating like heat, Courtney was magnetic in a way that made my chest tight. She stepped close. Enough that I could smell her perfume, something woodsy and complex that didn't match her paint-splattered appearance. You didn't even try to understand what I was doing. You saw a young woman making art about female desire and immediately dismissed it as shallow. Female desire? I found myself genuinely curious despite my defensive posture. Your artist statement mentioned themes of isolation and urban disconnection, because I couldn't write what I really meant. Her voice dropped, intimate despite our public setting. Not in this industry. Not when reviewers like you are looking for any excuse to tear apart women who dare to paint their own hunger. The honesty in her admission hit me like cold water. I'd spent 20 years in the art world, wielding my pen like a scalpel, never considering that my words might be silencing voices that deserve to be heard. Show me, I heard myself say. What? Show me what you really meant. Not what you wrote for the curator, not what you thought would sell. Show me the truth. Something shifted in her expression, suspicion giving way to cautious hope. When? Now. An hour later, I found myself in Courtney's studio apartment in Bushwick, surrounded by canvases that took my breath away. The paintings I dismissed as technically competent were revealed in their full context, part of a larger body of work that explored the intersection of loneliness and longing with devastating honesty. This one, she said, stopping before a canvas that seemed to pulse with life, I painted after my first time with a woman. I was 23, closeted, terrified. But for the first time in my life, I understood what people meant when they talked about losing yourself in another person. The painting showed two figures intertwined, their boundaries blurring until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. It was raw, honest, and absolutely beautiful. Why didn't you include this in the exhibition? I asked, my voice softer than it had been all evening, because I was scared. She looked directly at me, scared of reviews like yours. Scared of being dismissed as another queer woman making niche art. The shame hit me like a physical blow. I'd done exactly what she'd feared, and worse, I'd done it without even trying to understand her work. I owe you an apology, I said, and a retraction. I don't want your pity review. It wouldn't be pity. It would be honest. I moved closer to the canvas, studying the brushwork that I'd overlooked in the gallery. This is extraordinary work, Courtney, and I was too comfortable in my assumptions to see it. She was quiet for a long moment, and I became acutely aware of how small her apartment was, how close we were standing. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Why? Didn't you see it before? The question opened something in my chest that I'd kept locked for years, because I was looking for reasons to dismiss you. Because you're young and beautiful and talented, and that combination makes people like me feel ... threatened. Threatened? How? I should have deflected, made a joke, retreated behind my professional facade. Instead, I found myself telling the truth. Because when I was your age, I was too afraid to make art about anything that mattered. I chose criticism because it felt safer than putting my own desires on display. What desires? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not just a talented artist, but a woman who'd had the courage to paint her truth while I'd spent decades hiding from mine. The same ones you paint, I whispered. The kiss was inevitable, though I couldn't say who moved first. Her lips were soft, tasting of wine and something uniquely her. When we broke apart, I was breathless. This is complicated, I said. Everything worth doing is. Over the following weeks, our relationship evolved in ways I never could have predicted. What started as professional reconciliation became mentorship, and mentorship became something deeper. Courtney would come to my Upper East Side apartment every Tuesday evening, ostensibly to discuss her work and career strategy. But our conversations invariably turned personal, intimate, until the space between mentor and student collapsed entirely. "You're ruining my expensive sheets," I told her one Tuesday morning, watching her stretch across my Egyptian cotton bedding like a satisfied cat. She grinned, completely unrepentant. "Your thread count is pretentious anyway." 500 thread count is not pretentious, it's civilized, says the woman who just spent the night proving she's anything but civilized. The memory of what we'd done sent heat racing through me again. At 42, I thought I understood my body's capabilities. Courtney had taught me otherwise, but our happiness was fragile, built on borrowed time and secret meetings. The art world was small, gossipy, and unforgiving. When Marcus Webb, the disgraced gallery owner who'd lost his space to financial scandal, approached me at a coffee shop 3 months into our relationship, I knew our idyll was over. "Emily," he said, sliding uninvited into the seat across from me. "Lovely to see you as always." "Marcus." I kept my voice neutral, professional. "I heard about your gallery. I'm sorry. Are you?" His smile was reptilian. "Because I have something that might cheer you up, or perhaps not." He slid his phone across the table. On the screen was a photo of Courtney and me leaving my apartment building together, her hand clearly visible on my lower back in a gesture that could only be interpreted one way. "Interesting mentorship style you've developed." My blood went cold. "What do you want?" "A favorable review for my comeback exhibition." "Consider it insurance against these photos finding their way to the Times." The threat was clear. One phone call from Marcus could destroy both our careers and expose Courtney to the kind of scrutiny that had made her hide her true work in the first place. That night, I paced my apartment until Courtney arrived for our usual Tuesday evening. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, dropping her bag by the door. I told her everything. About Marcus, the photos, the ultimatum. I watched the color drain from her face as the implications sank in. "So we stop," she said finally. "We? And this before it destroys everything we've both worked for? Is that what you want?" She was quiet for so long, I thought she wouldn't answer. When she spoke, her voice was thick with tears. "What I want doesn't matter. I won't be the reason you lose your reputation." I crossed the room and took her face in my hands. My reputation was built on fear and compromise. "Maybe it's time I showed the same courage you do every time you pick up a brush." "Emily, no. You don't understand what you're risking." "I understand exactly what I'm risking, and I understand what I'm gaining." I kissed her then, pouring all my certainty into the contact. When we broke apart, I was resolved. We're going to call his bluff, and if he follows through, then we deal with the consequences together. The next morning, I wrote the review of my career. Not the one Marcus expected, a glowing endorsement of work I hadn't even seen, but a searing critique of blackmail, artistic integrity, and the courage required to live authentically. I published it alongside a retraction of my original review of Courtney's exhibition and an honest assessment of my own biases. The response was immediate and explosive. Some colleagues rallied to my defense, praising my honesty and professional integrity. Others called for my resignation, claiming I'd compromised my objectivity. But through it all, Courtney stood beside me, her faith unwavering. The weeks following my published confession were a whirlwind of consequences I hadn't fully anticipated. My editor at the Times called me into his office the morning after the piece went live, his face grim behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Emily," Richard said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk, "we need to talk." I sat down, spine straight, prepared for the worst. The article had generated more comments than any review I'd written in 5 years, some supportive, others calling for my immediate termination. "Your piece yesterday," he continued, "has created quite a stir. I stand by every word. I'm not asking you to recant." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "But I need to understand if this is a pattern we should expect. Are you planning to make your personal life a regular feature in your professional writing? The question was fair, even if it stung. This was about journalistic integrity, not personal disclosure. I made a professional mistake and I corrected it publicly. And Marcus Webb's threats are being handled appropriately. I'd already forwarded his messages to the paper's legal team. Richard was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. The board is meeting this afternoon. I can't make any promises about the outcome. That evening, Courtney found me pacing my apartment like a caged animal. She took one look at my face and pulled me into her arms without a word. How bad? She asked. I might lose my job. She was quiet, her fingers stroking through my hair. Finally, she pulled back to look at me. Would that be the worst thing? What? Do you mean? I mean, when's the last time you wrote something you actually cared about? Before yesterday? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on career preservation that I'd forgotten why I'd started writing about art in the first place. I don't remember, I admitted. Then maybe losing a job that's been making you miserable wouldn't be losing at all. The board meeting resulted in a suspension pending investigation, not termination, but not vindication either. For 3 weeks, I existed in professional limbo, watching other critics discuss exhibitions I should have been reviewing, but something unexpected happened during those weeks of forced hiatus. Without the pressure of constant deadlines and the need to maintain professional distance, I began to see art differently. Courtney and I spent hours wandering galleries and museums, her showing me techniques and approaches I'd never noticed, me sharing historical context and theoretical frameworks that enriched her understanding. Look at the brushwork here, she said, standing before a Jackson Pollock at MoMA. Everyone talks about the chaos, but look at the precision. This wasn't random violence, it was controlled passion. I studied the canvas with fresh eyes, seeing not just the historical significance I'd memorized in graduate school, but the human hands and heart that had created something beautiful from inner turmoil. Controlled passion, I repeated. Like what you do in your studio, she smiled. Like what we do everywhere. The investigation concluded with a formal reprimand and my reinstatement, accompanied by new ethical guidelines about disclosure of personal relationships. My first assignment back was a group show of emerging artists in Chelsea, exactly the kind of exhibition I would have dismissed 6 months earlier as commercially driven fluff. But as I walked through the gallery, notebook in hand, I found myself engaging with the work on its own terms, rather than through the filter of my preconceptions. One piece in particular stopped me cold in multimedia. Installation by a 24-year-old named Jasmine Rodriguez that combined painting, sculpture, and audio to explore the experience of first-generation immigrants. Powerful work, said a voice behind me. I turned to find Jasmine herself, paint under her fingernails and hope in her eyes. Tell me about your process, I said, genuinely curious. What followed was a 20-minute conversation that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with art criticism in the first place. Not the performance of expertise, but the privilege of witnessing human creativity and helping others understand its significance. My review of the exhibition ran. 2 weeks later, it was different from anything I'd written before, more personal. More generous, more willing to meet artists where they were, rather than demanding they conform to my expectations. The response from readers was overwhelmingly positive. You're writing like yourself again, Courtney said, reading over my shoulder as I edited another piece. Instead of writing like the Emily Clark brand, she was right. The professional mask I'd worn for 2 decades was finally slipping, revealing something more authentic underneath. As spring turned to summer, our relationship deepened in ways that surprised me. The initial intensity of our connection had settled into something steadier but no less passionate. Tuesday evenings remained sacred dinner at my apartment, long conversations about art and life, and yes, the systematic destruction of my expensive bedding. I need to buy stock in a linen company, I complained one Wednesday morning, surveying the wreckage of what had once been pristine Egyptian cotton. Or you could just accept that some things are meant to be ruined, Courtney said, stretching lazily across the destroyed sheets. That's where the beauty comes from. She was talking about more than bedding, and we both knew it. Our relationship had required the destruction of carefully constructed boundaries, professional, personal, emotional. But from that destruction had come something neither of us could have planned or predicted. The idea for our collaborative exhibition came to me during one of those lazy Wednesday mornings. Courtney was working on a new series about transformation, and I was struggling with an essay about the relationship between criticism and creation. What if we exhibited together? I said suddenly. She looked up from her sketch pad. What do you mean? Your paintings and my writing. Not criticism of your work, but parallel explorations of the same themes, art and words in conversation. The concept evolved over weeks of discussion and planning. We would explore the idea of authentic voice in art, how artists find the courage to express their truth, and how critics can support rather than suppress that expression. Courtney would create new paintings specifically for the exhibition, while I would write essays and creative pieces that complemented her visual narratives. Finding a gallery willing to take on such an unusual project proved challenging. Most established spaces couldn't conceive of an exhibition that mixed visual art with literary work in equal measure. It was Jasmine Rodriguez who suggested we approach Catalyst Gallery, a newer space in Bushwick known for experimental programming. The gallery director, Maria Santos, was intrigued but skeptical. How would this work practically? People come to galleries to look at art, not to read essays. What if the words were part of the visual experience? Courtney suggested. Not traditional wall text, but creative integration of text and image. We spent the next month developing a presentation that demonstrated our vision. My written pieces would be incorporated into the gallery space as visual elements, some printed on transparent materials and overlaid on paintings, others handwritten, directly onto walls, still others presented as audio recordings that visitors could access through headphones. At specific viewing stations. Maria was sold. This is exactly the kind of boundary-pushing work we want to support. When can you have everything ready? The 3 months leading up to the exhibition were the most creatively fulfilling of my life. Watching Courtney work in her studio, I began to understand the physical nature of creation in a way that decades of writing about art hadn't taught me. She invited me to try painting, and though my attempts were clumsy, the experience of translating thought directly into visual form was revelatory. Don't think so much, she said, guiding my hand as I struggled with color mixing. Feel what the painting wants to become. Paintings don't want anything. They're objects. Are they? She stepped back, looking at the canvas where I'd been working. Then why does this one feel like it's trying to tell us something? I looked at my amateurish brushstrokes and saw, to my surprise, that she was right. The painting, if it could be called that, did seem to contain some kind of message. Some truth I hadn't consciously intended to express. My writing began to change too, influenced by hours of watching Courtney work. I started paying attention to the rhythm and texture of language in new ways, treating words like paint that could be layered and blended to create effects beyond their literal meaning. Your prose is getting more visual, she observed, reading a draft of one of my exhibition pieces, more painterly. Is that good or bad? It's you. The real you, not the critic version. 2 weeks before the exhibition opening, disaster struck. Marcus Webb, apparently undeterred by his failed blackmail attempt, published a scathing blog post about our relationship and upcoming show. He questioned my professional ethics, suggested Courtney was sleeping her way to critical acclaim, and generally attempted to destroy both our reputations. We could cancel, Courtney said quietly, reading the post on her phone. Pull everything, and wait for this to blow over. I looked around her studio, filled with the paintings she'd created for our show. Honest, vulnerable, beautiful works that deserve to be seen. Then I thought about my own pieces, the most authentic writing I'd done in years. No, I said firmly. We're not giving him that power. Instead, we used his attack as motivation. I wrote an additional piece for the exhibition about the relationship between courage and creativity, about the forces that try to silence authentic voices, and about the importance of supporting artists who dare to tell their truth. Courtney created a new painting inspired by our conversation, a powerful image of creation emerging from destruction, beauty born from the ashes of what others had tried to tear down. The opening night of Authentic Voices, Art and Criticism, in conversation, was packed. I recognized faces from the art world establishment alongside younger artists and critics, curious viewers drawn by the unusual concept, and even some of my former detractors who'd come to see if we would fail spectacularly. Stood in the center of the gallery, watching people engage with our work in ways I'd never seen before. At one station, a young woman was reading my handwritten essay about artistic courage, while simultaneously studying Courtney's painting about coming out as an artist. At another, visitors with headphones were listening to my recorded piece about the evolution of critical voice while looking at Courtney's visual representation of transformation. It's working, Courtney said, appearing at my elbow with 2 glasses of wine. It's working, I agreed, amazed. The evening's highlight came when Maria Santos introduced us for a joint artist talk. Standing beside Courtney in front of our collaboratively created work, I felt a completeness I'd never experienced in my solo professional appearances. This exhibition challenges traditional boundaries between creation and criticism, I told the audience. It suggests that the relationship between artist and critic doesn't have to be adversarial, that we can be collaborators in the service of authentic expression. For me, Courtney added, working with Emily has shown me that vulnerability in art isn't weakness, it's the source of real power. When we're brave enough to show our truth, we give others permission to find theirs. The questions that followed were thoughtful, engaged, sometimes challenging, but never hostile. Even Marcus Webb supporters seemed genuinely curious about our work rather than looking for opportunities to attack. The exhibition ran for 6 weeks and received coverage in major art publications, several of which praised our innovative approach to interdisciplinary collaboration. More importantly to me, it attracted young artists and critics who saw in our partnership a model for more supportive, less hierarchical engagement with art. But the real measure of our success came in quieter moments. The college student who told us our work had inspired her to write honestly about her own artistic struggles. The established critic who admitted our exhibition had made him reconsider his approach to reviewing emerging artists. The middle-aged woman who said seeing our collaboration had given her courage to pursue her own creative dreams after years of thinking it was too late. 6 months later, we collaborated on an exhibition that redefined both our careers. Courtney's paintings were displayed alongside my written reflections on art, criticism, and the transformative power of genuine connection. The show was a critical and commercial success, but more importantly, it established us as partners in both art and life. The months following our exhibition success brought unexpected opportunities. Museums began reaching out, interested in programming that combined visual art with literary work. Art schools invited us to speak about interdisciplinary collaboration. Publishers expressed interest in a book that would chronicle our artistic partnership and personal journey, but it was the letter from the Venice Biennale that stopped me cold. They want us to represent something entirely new, I said, reading the invitation for the 3rd time. Not just American contemporary art, but collaborative critical practice as an art form itself. Courtney looked up from the canvas she was working on another piece in her ongoing series about transformation. That's huge. That's terrifying, I corrected. The Venice Biennale isn't some experimental gallery in Bushwick. It's the most prestigious exhibition in the art world. She set down her brush and came to sit beside me on the studio couch we'd installed in her space after spending so much time there. What are you afraid of? It was the question she always asked when I started spiraling into professional anxiety, and it always cut straight to the heart of my resistance. I'm afraid we're frauds, I admitted. I'm afraid that what works in New York won't translate internationally. I'm afraid that we'll get there and everyone will see that I'm just a critic who got lucky, and you're just a talented artist who got involved with the wrong person. She took my hands, her paint-stained fingers warm against my skin. Emily, look at me. I did, finding the steady confidence in her eyes that had first attracted me at that gallery opening. We're not frauds. We created something real, something that matters. And if other people can't see that, it says more about them than it does about us. Her certainty was infectious, and I felt some of my anxiety ease. When did you become the wise one in this relationship? I've always been wise. You were just too busy being intimidated by my youth to notice. We accepted the Venice invitation, which meant 6 months of intensive preparation. The Biennale wasn't just an exhibition, it was a statement about the direction of contemporary art, and the pressure to create something worthy of that platform was immense. Our proposal centered on the idea of critical love, the notion that authentic criticism comes not from distance and judgment, but from deep engagement and care. We would create an immersive installation where visitors could experience the evolution of our relationship through art. From that first confrontational gallery meeting to our current collaborative practice, the work required new levels of vulnerability from both of us. Courtney began creating paintings that documented specific moments in our relationship, not idealized romantic scenes, but honest depictions of conflict, growth, and intimacy. I wrote prose pieces that revealed details about my personal life I'd never shared publicly, exploring how falling in love with Courtney had changed not just my approach to criticism, but my understanding of what it meant to live authentically. This feels like emotional exhibitionism, I complained one evening, struggling with a particularly revealing essay about my sexual awakening at 42. All good art is emotional exhibitionism, Courtney replied without looking up from her canvas. The question is whether you trust the audience with your vulnerability. What if they don't deserve it? Then that's their loss, not yours. Working toward Venice also meant confronting the international art world's particular brand of elitism and gatekeeping. Several prominent European critics published pieces questioning whether our collaboration represented genuine innovation or was merely American sentimentality disguised as conceptual art. Listen to this, I said, reading from my laptop during one of our studio sessions. Clark and Perry's work may appeal to audiences seeking validation for their own lack of critical rigor, but serious collectors will recognize it as derivative of superior European traditions of institutional critique. Who wrote that? Heinrich Müller, Berlin-based critic, very influential in European circles. Courtney continued painting, seemingly unaffected by the dismissal. And he's probably going to be at Venice, along with dozens of other critics who think we're naive Americans playing at being serious artists. She finally looked up from her work. Emily, do you remember what you told me the night I confronted you about that first review? I told you. I was looking for reasons to dismiss you. Right, and what's Mueller doing? The parallel was clear, and it stung because it was accurate, looking for reasons to dismiss us. So the question is, are we going to let his insecurity dictate our work? We weren't. If anything, the criticism motivated us to push our concept further, to create something so undeniably powerful that it couldn't be dismissed as mere American. Sentimentality, the installation we developed for Venice, was unlike anything either of us had attempted before. Visitors would enter through a recreation of that first gallery space where we'd met, complete with the paintings from Courtney's original exhibition and audio of the harsh review I'd initially written. From there, they would move through a series of rooms that chronicled our relationship's evolution through increasingly integrated combinations of visual art and written word. The centerpiece was a room Courtney called Tuesday, filled with paintings of intimate moments from our weekly evenings together, accompanied by my written reflections on how regular intimacy had changed my understanding of both love and art. The paintings weren't explicit, but they were deeply personal Courtney's brushstrokes, capturing the tenderness and passion that had grown between us. My words exploring how physical intimacy had opened emotional territories I'd never allowed myself to explore. This room will make or break us, I said during one of our final preparation sessions. It's either going to be seen as a beautiful meditation on love as creative force, or as self-indulgent oversharing. Which do you think it is? I looked around the space we'd created, at the careful integration of image and text, at the way visitors would be invited to experience our relationship, not as voyeurs, but as witnesses to a transformation that had implications beyond our personal story. I think it's necessary, I said finally. I think it says something true about how intimacy creates the conditions for authentic expression. Then we're doing the right thing. The weeks leading up to Venice were a blur of logistics, travel, arrangements, and final artistic decisions. But underneath the professional preparation was a deeper current of anticipation. This wasn't just a career milestone, it was a public declaration of what we built together, presented on one of the world's most visible stages. The opening of the Biennale was everything I'd expected and nothing I was prepared for. The international art world descended on Venice in full force, and our installation drew crowds from the moment the doors opened. Some visitors spent hours moving through our space, engaging deeply with each element. Others rushed through, checking us off their biennial bucket list. But almost everyone had a reaction, positive or negative, thoughtful or dismissive, but never indifferent. The critical response was as divided as we'd anticipated. European critics largely dismissed our work as overly personal and theoretically weak, while American critics praised our innovation and courage. But the response that mattered most came from younger artists and critics who saw in our collaboration a model for more generous, more collaborative engagement with contemporary art. You've created something important, said Ana Reyes, a curator from Madrid who stopped by during the opening week. Not just as art, but as a way of working. You're showing people that criticism doesn't have to be destructive. That evening, Courtney and I walked along the canals, processing the day's responses and our own complicated feelings about public reception of such personal work. Do you regret it? She asked, putting so much of ourselves on display. I thought about the question seriously. The vulnerability was intense, almost overwhelming at times. But when I remembered the young artist who'd approached me that afternoon to say our work had given her courage to write honestly about her own struggles with identity and creativity, I knew the answer. No, I said firmly. I regret all the years I wasted hiding behind professional distance. Even if your career had suffered more than it has. Especially then. What's the point of a successful career built on a false version of yourself? We stopped on a bridge, looking out over the water, reflecting Venice's ancient lights. In 6 months, we'd gone from secret lovers worried about professional consequences to public collaborators, representing new possibilities for critical practice at the world's most important art exhibition. I have something for you, Courtney said on a Tuesday evening, nearly a year after that first confrontation at the gallery. She seemed nervous, fidgeting with something in her pocket. If it's another painting, I don't have any more wall space. It's not a painting. She dropped to one knee beside my expensive sofa, producing a small velvet box that made my heart stop. Emily Clark, she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. You ruined my exhibition, and I ruined your expensive sheets, but somehow, in all that destruction, we found something beautiful. I was crying now, too, overwhelmed by the impossible journey that had brought us here. Will you marry me? Yes, I whispered, then louder. Yes, absolutely yes. As she slipped the ring onto my finger, I realized that everything I thought I wanted, professional respect, emotional distance, expensive things paled in comparison to this moment. This woman who challenged every assumption I'd held about art, about desire, about what it meant to live bravely. So, she said, pulling me down onto the sofa beside her, ready to ruin some more expensive sheets. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. Ruin away, I'll buy new ones. Because what we'd built together was worth more than any thread. Count, any professional reputation, any safe choice I'd ever made. We'd taken all our careful plans and beautiful expectations and torn them apart, creating something raw and honest and absolutely perfect. And every Tuesday, when I watched her stretch across my bed with that satisfied smile, I was reminded that sometimes the most beautiful art comes from complete destruction of assumptions, of fears, of the walls we build to keep ourselves safe. In the end, we didn't just survive our scandals and secrets. We transformed them into something larger than either of us could have created alone. A love story painted in bold strokes across the canvas of our shared life.